call the Truth and Taxation meeting to order.
Mayor, Council, good evening, staff, members of the public. This is our annual public informational hearing on the 2023 budget and tax levy. So this is the Truth and Taxation hearing. This is in regards to obviously our annual requirement by state law to conduct a public hearing on proposed budget and tax levy. This date and time was set aside by the council a couple months ago and was also communicated to the public. Obviously those who are in attendance and those who may be watching by either television or streaming. So with that, I will jump into our presentation. There's a lot of information that I'm going to share. There'll be opportunity at the end of the meeting to ask questions. Even if you want me to stop quick and clarify something, just kind of let me know. So this is our agenda for tonight. We'll talk a little bit about the budget process to date. We'll get into some of this general hearing information. We'll look at some comparisons that we do from a year-to-year basis. We'll talk about property taxation 101. And then we'll dive into our tax levy and general fund budget. We'll do kind of a highlight of our enterprise fund budgets. We'll take a quick look at our capital improvement plan and debt management plan. And then we'll have kind of a conclusion summary along with some next steps. On your desk and out on the table, there should be a copy of this presentation, and then there is a summary explanation of our proposed budget, and then there's a detailed budget for your review as well. So first off, our process to date, City Council and staff have held 4 public work sessions over the past 7 months, with our first one taking place on May 24th, and our last one prior to tonight taking place on November 22nd. The City Council adopted the preliminary budget and tax levy in September. The truth and taxation notices were mailed out to all city property owners last month. The numbers that were shown in that report were based off of the preliminary budget and tax levy that the council approved back in September. So technically this is our 5th public meeting regarding the budget. This is the one where an actual invitation goes out to all of the public to attend, but this is our actual 5th public hearing on the proposed budget for 2023. The main purpose of our hearing tonight, like I said, this is required by state law. And it's something I think we would do either which way, to at least to share the information. But the main purpose of it is to enhance the public participation in the property tax system by allowing a public forum to A, discuss the budget, B, discuss the proposed tax levy, explain any increases, and then to hear public comments and questions regarding both the budget and the tax levy. Tonight is the Truth and Taxation hearing. If there is a need for a continuation of this hearing, that will take place on Tuesday, December 13th, which is our next council meeting. And then the final budget and tax levy, the plan is for that to be adopted at our last council meeting of the year, which is Tuesday, December 27th. And at the very latest, our tax levy needs to be certified to the county by December 30th. With that, I'll get into just some general information regarding our hearing tonight. I always like to share that the data, our source of data for all this is the city of Hutchinson, unless I have noted it or I noted, I'll usually highlight that on a slide. Since this is my 20th year now of doing these truth and taxation hearings, I always like to share this at the very beginning of the hearing because it can be very confusing. Tonight we discuss the city's share of your total 2023 proposed tax bill, not property valuations. And I share that because most people that show up want to talk about property valuations. That's actually done in the spring. Tonight we're here to talk about the city's portion of the property tax bill for 2023. But with that being said, I always like to at least highlight, because like I said, somebody will show up wanting to talk about valuations, or somebody may be tuning in and wants to talk about valuations. So I always like to just kind of highlight our property tax calendar. There will be an opportunity for the public to talk about valuations, but that usually occurs in about April, May, June timeframe. Once you get your new valuation statements that come out in March. That's how Minnesota's property tax system um, works. So briefly on valuations, in Minnesota, the market value of a property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. So in other words, market values for taxes payable in 2023 were set in January of this past year. So property values and statements recently received are based off of home sales from October of 2020 to September of 2021. This is purely market driven, and I'll share a little bit where if anyone was like me and saw their value go up by $45,000, I'll share a little bit about where that's coming from. But we're always kind of a year behind, so keep in mind when I show you probably the next slide and what that may mean for even next year. So property owners will receive new notices of market values from the assessor in March or April of next year. Questions on that valuation should be addressed at the open book meeting in May or June, which is held at the county assessor's office. And usually there'll be a notification on when you can go and meet with that and meet with them, and they'll discuss your valuations. One of the things I like to highlight is what our median home value prices are doing, because that drives a lot of where our valuations are going. And this is taking a look at the past 10 years. The data that's up there is through October, is through sales of October of 2022. And that's from our Minneapolis area of realtors in the city of Hutchinson. So that number actually usually comes down a little bit once we have all the final sales. But through October, the median home sale is about $260,000 in Hutchinson, which is about a $45,000 increase from 2021. And when you go back to 2012, which was actually the bottom of kind of the Great Recession, when our home values bottomed out, we're at about 156% increase since 2012. So our median home value right now is about a 21% increase from last year. And so you can see what the market is doing. If anybody's looking to buy or sell a home, I think you've experienced that, but that's really one of the main factors of what's pushing up home values in town is what the market's doing. Because the state has a law that says, and this comes down to more the county assessor, when they set valuations, it has to be within 90 to 105% of what the average home sale is within a given year. And so that's what's helping to push market values up within the community. So that's a brief summary. The county assessor can do a better job of talking about specific individual homes, but I always like to at least share that because I know it's a question that comes up during this time of year. First off, before we jump into more of our comparisons and the numbers, the preliminary tax levy in September and the property tax effect, that's the statement you got in the mail, showed a city tax increase of 5.9%. That was from the preliminary levy adopted by the council in September. Since that time, what we're talking about tonight, we're looking at a revised budget that includes a 3.3% tax levy increase and a balanced budget. So since September, the city, we've made adjustments in our revenue and expenses, and we've eliminated roughly $206,000 in property taxes from our preliminary budget that we adopted in September. So basically what that means is that the city's portion of your tax statement should go down come the bill you get in the spring, because we're looking at a different tax levy from what the preliminary one was adopted in September. So please keep that in mind. And we'll highlight some of those changes as we go through the presentation tonight. One thing the council has asked me to do, and we like to try to do in a given year when we have this public hearing, is just to do a little bit of comparison of where we're at compared to other communities. And so we'll take a look at other communities in Hutchinson, along with other communities in our outstate regional centers, of which we identify ourselves as one of 19, and then touch on a little bit about where we're at statewide. So when we look at the McLeod County and the other communities within McLeod County, um, when we look at a 2022 average city tax rate, that was at 60.41%. With our preliminary levy that we adopted in September, that would have made our tax rate for next year at 54.83%. What we're looking at tonight makes that tax rate at 53.49%, which puts us as the second lowest municipal tax rate in McLeod County. I always like to highlight that because you have to remember there's other aspects of your property tax statement. You've got your school district, you've got your county tax, and then you have special taxing districts, and then potentially if you're a commercial property owner, you may have a state tax on top of that as well. So obviously our responsibility is for the city municipal tax, and that's what I'm making comparisons on. When we take a look at other outstate regional centers, like I said, we're one of 19 small outstate regional centers that we take into comparison. The most recent data I have is for 2021, so that's what I'm able to compare ourselves to. But I've also highlighted our 2022 and 2023 proposed tax rates. In regards to our 2021 rates, we were the 5th highest of those outstate regional centers, but one of the things I want to highlight is this area over here on the screen, what the statewide average was for a tax rate. That's 74.19%. That's when you take every municipality within the state of Minnesota, the average municipal tax rate is 74.19% in 2021. Comparison-wise, we were at 63.88. In 2022, we were at 60.41 and proposed to be at 53.49%. So one of the questions or one of the comments that we consistently hear is that the city's tax rate is too high or is high. I'm not here to judge that. That's really up to the public and the council to decide. All I will say is, what are you comparing us to? If we want to compare ourselves to other cities in the county, we're on the low side. If we compare ourselves to other cities in our outstate regional centers, we're on the high side. And if you compare ourselves to those cities amongst the state, we're below average or above average, depending on which way you want to look at that. Below average in regards to the actual rate. So I would say we're about average when it comes to our municipal property tax rate throughout the state of Minnesota.
Do you see that statewide average changing much this year?
That will likely come down just because we've seen a growth in value throughout the entire state. And so my guess is that statewide average may be around 70%. And I'll hopefully get those numbers here in the next months. Usually have by now, and the state's slow in releasing that information this year. So, will it come down to the same percentage as we did? Maybe, but we're not going to be drastically different than that 74%. So, just a couple other things. This is new information this year based off of 2020 census data that came out. When we compare ourselves to those 18 other outstate regional centers, we do have the third lowest percentage of our population below the poverty level. Our median household income is just over $56,000. That's the 5th highest of those outstate regional centers. But comparison-wise, I think the statewide average is about $72,000 to $74,000. So just keep that in perspective. Median home value. Now this is based off of census data. We have more up-to-date data. When I'm showing you the 216,000, but based off of 2020 census, which is the easiest comparison, we have the 6th highest median home value in outstate Minnesota. Our 2021 local government aid payment is the 3rd lowest of outstate regional centers. Now, a lot of it has to do with the amount of new housing that we've built over the last 20 to 30 years. That's one of the calculation factors in local government aid. For 2023, this was released 2 weeks ago. Statewide, the average preliminary property tax increase for Minnesota cities was 9.1%. So that was when taking into account all the preliminary tax increases that were put out in September.
That's for every city in the state?
Every city, the average increase was 9.1%. You remember at that time we were at 5.9%. We're now at 3.3%. All taxing agencies, so that's including your county, your school districts, your townships, your special taxing agencies. The proposed 2023 tax increase was 6%. Just for comparisons, when we look at our preliminary proposed tax increases for next year. One of the graphs we like to highlight is just, how is our tax rate increase compared to our tax base? And I'll share a little bit more on what we're seeing for our tax base increase, but essentially our tax levy increases are not outpacing our tax base increases, which is why we're seeing our tax rate decrease. So our tax base is expanding at a rate that's greater than what our tax increases are going, which is lowering our proposed tax rate for next year. One of the things that we like to compare, we like to at least look at, is the price of government. This is not an exact science, but it's something that we at least like to look at on a year in, year out basis. And really what this is the percentage of personal income that's going to pay for the city of Hutchinson government services. You can see for this past year is about 2.4%. And that's the formula that we use is it's a per capita personal income times our population divided by our city revenue. So that's how we come up with this. I think the statewide, when you look at state taxes, it's about 12-13%. They say city on average should be around 5-6%. So after kind of touching on some of our comparisons, I'm going to get into some of the nitty gritty, really boring, geeky stuff regarding property taxation 101, but something I always like to share. One thing to keep in mind is that we like to know to the public that there are 14 reasons property taxes may vary from year to year. Really, the city of Hutchinson has an impact on a couple of those. One is our city budget and tax levy. Another one may be a special assessment that we assess against a property. A third one may be, for Hutchinson's sake, is a special district's budget and levy. As the council is aware, and the public will know if they're not aware, we have an EDA that has a taxing district, and we have an HRA that has a taxing district, and then there's a regional economic, which is Region 6, I believe, that has a taxing district over us. There are separate boards for both our EDA and HRA, but the council has the final say on what those levies are. Otherwise, like I said, there's anywhere from 10 to 11 other reasons that property taxes may go up. So it's just something important, I think, for the average taxpayer to make sure they're keeping an eye on. There could be a couple different factors that are pushing your property taxes up. Minnesota's property tax system is based off of 5 components. Component 1 is our local property tax levies. That's the city, the school district, the county. If you live in the township, it's the township. And then those special taxing districts as well. That's one aspect of it. A second aspect of it is the property tax classification rate. And that ranges from anything from 0.25% to 2%. And that's set by the state, and that's based off of the classification of your property. Matt, what do you mean by that? So if you have a residential property, I think the tax classification rate is 1%. I think ag land is maybe 0.25%. If you have a commercial, large industrial business, that might be 2%. And so what that means is that the state, by their design, taxes properties that produce revenue, they assume produces revenue, so that'd be your commercial, industrial, maybe your rental property. They tax them at a higher rate than your residential property. That's a design by the state of Minnesota. So if you own a business in town and you own a home, you can see the difference, and that's mainly associated with the classification that's assigned. Third component is the property value, and we've talked about that a little bit tonight as well. And that's mainly based off of property sales, and that's set by the county assessor. There are tax credits where certain properties get those. And then there's a general state tax, and that's mainly assigned to commercial and industrial properties. excuse me, so like the highlight is that commercial industrial properties have a disadvantage when it comes to Minnesota's property tax system, and that's designed by the state of Minnesota. Because they design those that are making, quote unquote, making money, if you're a business, they are gonna tax you at a higher rate than your residential property. So I think it's just something that we need to keep in mind as a council, is that when we're setting taxes, tax levy increases, it's gonna impact your business community a little bit higher. That's mainly because of the way the system is set up through the state of Minnesota. So, like I said, there's so many different layers to it. This is just a brief summary, but I know it can get very confusing and complicated. So trying to explain that in a little bit more detail. You can actually calculate what your new local tax rate is going to be if you know the value of your property. So how do we come up with a tax rate? And that's taking our total tax capacity, which is the value of the community, and you take into account the various different classifications that I talked about. And that's divided by our total tax, the taxes that we're looking to collect. Clear as mud, right? So if you take your parcel market value minus your homestead exclusion, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, times your parcel class rate, times your city tax rate, that's how you determine your new city portion of your tax bill. So for example, if you have a $230,000 home, we factor in the exclusion and your class rate and what our new city tax rate will be based off of the adjustments that we made since September. You're looking at having a city tax of about $1,142. That same home in Glencoe, based off of their tax rate, will pay over $1,500, and that same home in Winstead, based off of their tax rate, would pay over $1,600. It's the best way we can use. Tax rate is the easiest comparison for property to property from one community to the next, because many times we don't look at the value of the home, and that needs to be an important part of that evaluation.
This is a question, Matt, is,
Sure.
you wanna go back to the other page?
Sure.
That exclusion,
Yep.
is that, that's only on a $230,000 home, so your exclusion is lower as your property tax is lower?
Your exclusion, and I'll show that graph in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
The exclusion is a state program. It's a state tax incentive program. The higher your value goes up, the lower that exclusion comes down. Until you get, I think, if your home is valued, I think at over $413,000 or higher, there's no market exclusion. So you don't receive a tax break from the state. I'll touch on that in just a little bit too. So as we look at least a couple of the different options that the staff and city council looked at, I've highlighted here what we're going to be discussing tonight. That's current option number 2. That's the 3.3% tax levy increase that we're looking to bring forward in December. The area to the far right is what the preliminary levy was set at. If you look at your far left, that's what the tax impact would be if we did a 0% tax levy increase. A couple things to highlight is this area down below, which takes into account median home value and the increase that we're seeing in values throughout the community. Had we done a 0% tax levy increase, if you had a home that last year was valued at $200,000, but this year is now valued at $230,000 because of what market values are doing, you would still see about a $14 increase in your property taxes because your property value increased. That same home with our preliminary tax levy was expected to get about a $79 increase. With the adjustments that we made and the lowering of our tax levy, we're now looking at about a $51 increase. So you could say that it's a combination of the increase in values along with setting our preliminary tax levy increase. So roughly of that 51, what's quick math, $37 is probably the equivalent of our proposed tax levy increase for next year.
Well, I think this year the big hit was the homestead exclusion, cause I think a lot of people got bumped to where it wasn't around anymore, and I think that really surprised some people.
Yep, and that leads me, perfect segue, Chad, into the next. So back in 2011, the state repealed the market value homestead credit and they replaced it with the market value exclusion. It's essentially a state program to give tax relief to property owners and the single family homeowners. And so what they did was, the best way to do is to compare it as, if you had a home that was valued at $200,000, well, we'll use these numbers down here below, this is easier. Your home is valued at $76,000. The state says we're only going to tax you on $45,600. That's what this exclusion is. This is the graph, and this is how it changes as values go up. So you'll see that the exclusion, or the tax credit, decreases the higher your value goes. Until you get to $413,800, then you no longer receive a tax credit from the state. So Chad, you're right. I think there's been a lot more homes that have made it into that $400,000 plus. And so on top of potentially having a tax increase, you now no longer have an exclusion as well. So you might be double or triple whammy hit with with the increase in value, which then may impact your exclusion along with a tax levy increase.
Well, there's a lot of houses that probably made that jump from 250 to 413, you know.
In the last 5 or 6 years, very well possible. So like I said, we all know this, we live in Minnesota, our property, or even in the United States, our property tax system is very complicated. And so I think it's just important for the council and for the public to realize there are many different layers that have an impact, which we do have a responsibility for, but just something to keep in mind. This is obviously no surprise, but this is just a graph that shows the market value of the community and how much that has grown over the last several years. I would say in one aspect that's very good. It's showing that we are growing as a community. But our value from 2021 to 2022 increased 15.9% to our highest value ever. That was on top of 11.9% increase from 2020 to 2021. Our 2022 value is 69% higher than our 2014 value. So we've seen property values grow within our community over the last 10 years. Taking a quick step back, like I said, we're here to talk about the city's portion of the tax bill, but I always like to highlight, when you get your bill in the mail, there's other aspects of it too. There's the county, the schools debt, the HRA, the EDA, and the Region 6E. So this is just looking at, when you get your bill in the mail, what likely the portion of that is where that's going to. So our portion of it is roughly 35%. 34% goes to the county, about 30% goes to the school district, and then the other small percentage goes to the EDA, HRA, and Region 6E. I'm anticipating that will change a little bit, but not significantly for 2023. You might see our percentage go down to 0.5% maybe, depending on what the other taxing units do. So that's more of a lot of the summary background into our budget. What I'm going to do now is jump into more of the details regarding the proposed tax levy and general fund budget for 2023. I always like to highlight this because I think it's an important part of what we do as a city. I talk about every year that I believe that the budget that we adopt, along with the tax levy, is the biggest policy decision that the city council makes on a given year. It helps direct services that we provide, programs that we're going to do, and projects that we're going to fund for the upcoming year or years. And so with that being said, I always like to at least identify, when we talk about policies, what our mission statement is as a city, and then what our core values are the core areas of focus that we look at. This is our mission statement, which is that the city of Hutchinson exists so that residents, businesses, property owners, and visitors are provided with quality services and programs that support a safe, healthy, sustainable, and business-friendly community with a small town atmosphere for a cost of government similar to or less than comparable outstate Minnesota cities. And we have 6 core areas of focus. It's public safety, health and recreation, transportation, economic development, environment, and good government. And what I would say is that every decision we make is based off of at least one of these 6 core areas of focus, and many times maybe multiple areas of focus, which helps then drive our budget decisions along with our tax levy decisions. So as we look at our tax levy for 2023, these are the different aspects of the tax levy. The top half of this graph is the one the city council is directly responsible for, and we have 3 aspects of that. It's our general fund levy, our tax abatement levy, and our debt fund levy. The general fund is what pays for basically the day-to-day operations of the city. We're proposing a 3.7% increase to that. The tax abatement, which is $30,000, that was for a business incentive to recruit Uponor to the community. That was approved by the council probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And so what happens is as they pay their taxes, we give a portion of that back to them. That's that $30,000 that's going back to them. That was used as a recruitment tool. I think that expires 15 years, something like that. So we probably have 10 to 12 years left on that. Our debt levy is the levies that we collect to pay for all of our debt obligation. And that's expected to go up 2.6%. And that's essentially to account for the second half portion of the cost for our police station. So for next year, we're proposing a tax levy of just over $8.2 million, which is a 3.3% increase from 2022. I've included on there the EDA levy and the HRA levy because the council has, those are set by other boards, but the council has the final up or down vote on whether or not they will pass that on to the property taxpayers of Hutchinson. So the EDA is proposing an 18.2% increase for next year, and the HRA is actually looking at a decrease of 23% for next year. One of the big reasons for the EDA levy increase is one of their projects they're working on is for the recruitment and retention of more employees into the community. They're going to put a big focus on marketing and recruitment. That's where a good portion of that increase is going. And with the changeover in staff, that's where the HRA was able to, we had a retirement, and so they were able to cut some of their costs with new staff. Just to back up once again, EDA, their main goal is the recruitment and retention of businesses within our community, and the HRA, their main goal is the recruitment of and retention of both housing and, more importantly, affordable housing within the community. Once again, just highlighting what our statewide averages were at in September as well. Those are the different debt obligations that our tax levy is going to pay for. We do have some special assessments that go along to help cover those costs, along with some bond proceeds that may be helping pay down some of the cost as well. This is just taking a look at what our tax levy trend has been over the last 10 years. Since 2013, we've had an average tax levy increase of 2.4%. And it's gotten a little bit higher the last 5 years, which is closer to about 2.99%. We've had a fairly steady tax increase of between about 2 and 3% over the last probably decade in the city. The proposed 2023 tax levy includes the 8th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of the levy, and our 2nd straight year, our debt fund portion. Compared to 2023, our total tax levy is increased by 27.9%, which is about a 2.4% increase. And just per capita, just another measurable, we're looking at about a $559 per capita tax next year compared to $545 in 2022. Some additional information on our tax rate and our tax levy. The city's growth in tax capacity, which went up almost 17%, continues to outpace the tax levy. which is scheduled at 3.3%, resulting in a decreasing city tax rate. 2023 city tax rate expected to be 6.92% lower than the 2022 tax rate. And Hutchinson's tax rate has decreased each year since 2014. The median home value would see a $14 city tax bill increase based on an estimated 18.1% increase in value. A property possibly may not see a city tax increase if the value did not increase at the same rate as the median home value. And then a property valued at $200,000 in 22 that would keep the same value would see about $125 decrease in its city tax bill. Essentially what we're saying is that we are not raising taxes at a levy that's outpacing the market value growth within the community, and that's why your tax rates are going down. Now, obviously the argument can be made that they'd be even lower if you weren't raising taxes, and that's obviously something that the council takes into consideration each and every year. That is this graph up here is just our 10-year tax rate trend and what our tax rate have been doing over. You can see that decrease, or that steady decrease in tax rates going all the way back to 2014. Shifting from tax levies, looking at our general fund revenues, you can see that 3.6% increase in property taxes. We have other taxes on here. That's there is a hotel tax we have in town. We do have a franchise, a cable TV franchise tax. So those are the other taxes that are being collected as well. Licenses and permits, that's mainly our building permit revenue. We're keeping that pretty steady for next year. We know there are some big projects. Quite honestly, we're just not sure with what's going on with inflation, the high cost of construction, if we're going to see an uptick in revenue or not. Intergovernmental revenue, that's your state aid that we get transfer in. That's the transfers that we get from Hutch Utilities, Creekside, and the liquor store. Part of that is also, so we have about a $38,000 increase in our payment from Hutch Utilities that's budgeted for next year. Overall, we're looking at a 2.6% increase in total general fund revenues in our proposed budget for next year. So where does our revenues come from for the general fund? Roughly 41% of our revenue comes from property taxes. Charges for service is about 20%. That's when you go to the pool and you have to pay to get in. That's where your charges for services come in. Once again, 19% is from transfer ins. That's your liquor store, Hutch Utilities, Creekside, and we do take a little bit out of water and sewer for some administrative costs. And roughly 13% of our revenue comes from state aid. Some additional facts on our general fund revenues. The general fund includes a 3.6% tax levy increase for next year. We talked about property taxes come for about 41% of that. We are phasing out our HSA funding from our self-insurance plan. We talked about the LGA increase. We do split our LGA up between our local government aid, between our capital projects fund and our general fund. And so we had about a $29,000 increase in local government aid. So half of that is going to pay for services. The other half is going to pay for long-term capital needs. That would be your infrastructure, buildings, park equipment, so on. I know Gary asked me to share this information, and so I'm going to highlight that. We get over just about $2.7 million from the liquor fund, Creekside, and Hutch Utilities. That's the equivalent of about a 48.5% tax levy increase. So liquor fund, they're going to be contributing $550,000. That's about a 10% tax levy increase if we didn't have that revenue from the liquor store. Question is, well, yeah, but if you didn't have your own liquor store, you could have private liquor stores that could open up. We would need about 20 liquor stores in town to open up to hit that equivalent of $550,000. So,
and they would have to do over $7 million in business.
Well, I mean, that's looking at just the property taxes we're going to be collecting. So,
I just wanted Matt to point that out, cause a lot of people always say that, you know, Creekside don't contribute to the city, you know, and, you know, why a liquor store, why don't we let other people come in? But, you know, that'd be a big increase if we wouldn't have those three.
For the most part, respected most of our other revenue sources remain relatively flat. Just kind of a good reminder, 1% tax levy increase to the general fund is equivalent to about $56,000. Looking at our expenses for next year, we're looking at about a 2.4% increase from wages and benefits, and that's general performance reviews, wage adjustments. That includes any new employees that we may be bringing on. I would say some of the increases in your supplies, services and charges and miscellaneous expenses, that's heavily related to what we're seeing just for the increased costs in fuel and other inflationary measures. I'll touch on this a little bit later, but we're having to basically renew our body cam equipment for our police department, and that's gonna be a $45,000 budget impact next year. So that shows up in your miscellaneous, or I think, you know, your services and charges, so. Overall, you're looking at about a 2.6% increase in general fund expenses, which matches obviously the revenue that we had budgeted. So where does that go? I would say these pies very rarely change significantly from year to year. But roughly 33%, 33 to 34% goes to public safety. Another 23% goes to culture and recreation. About 15% goes to streets and highways, and then 25% goes to general government. Some people may look at that and go, well, you're not spending a lot of money on your streets and highways. One thing to keep in mind, that doesn't include our capital improvement plan, which about 80% of that money goes to our infrastructure. So this is just our general fund, and we'll talk about enterprise funds a little bit later. That's a history of what our general fund budget has looked like over the last 12 years. I would know, 12, 13, 14, we were kind of coming out of that Great Recession. We had eliminated some services and a lot of the staff, and we've kind of bring some of that back on over the last probably 8, 9 years. You'll notice a big jump from 16 to 17. That's the opening of the aquatic center. So we obviously have that revenues that come in with that. And then some of the other jumps were just in the additions of, I think we hired a couple new officers. And then just as we saw our services expand, we added new employees. And so that's kind of otherwise I would say we've generally been in that 3% growth within our general fund budget. Some additional facts on our expenses. Wages and benefits increased by about $229,000 in our proposed budget. Once again, that includes some performance and other adjustments. We did shop out our health insurance plan, which is going to bring in a savings of about $78,000. That's one of the big reasons that we saw a decrease in from our preliminary tax levy to our levy that we're looking at now to adopt in December. One thing to keep in mind, and this number has stayed pretty steady over the years, roughly 68% of our general fund expenses goes to wages and benefits. We are a people-oriented business organization. That is where the majority of our costs are. And so when we talk about, Matt, what are good ways to really reduce expenses? It's going to be in staffing. And the big question is staffing then also translate to services that we provide. And so I think it's just something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about that. Not saying we can't, but that conversation needs to be broader than just eliminating staff. Some of the other costs, like I said, we talked about the $45,000 increase. It's kind of a one-time cost for our police body camera system. And then we've factored into some of those higher costs with inflation into our proposed budget. I would say the other probably significant change that we're looking at for next year when it comes to services is that we are scaling back on what our event center is going to look like. So if someone were to ask, okay, Matt, what type of services are you decreasing next year? I would say it's going to be the availability and the use of our event center, which is going to save us about $64,000. We are essentially getting out of that business, I think is the easiest way to put it. Not the senior center business, the event center business. So I want to clarify that because I've had conversations about that in the past. So currently our 2023 budget expenses are balanced with revenues. I'm not going to spend as much time, but I always like to at least highlight our enterprise funds. These do not receive property tax dollars. These are all self-sufficient. The revenues they collect pay for their expenses. So that's our liquor fund, our compost, our garbage, our water, wastewater, and stormwater. And some of these you may see, well, the expenses are higher than the revenues. Remember, first off, we don't budget for depreciation, and so that shows up on your balance sheet. And then secondly, we are doing some capital improvements, so we're able to use cash to make those improvements. But generally, but I guess in summary, this is kind of a review of what our proposed budgets look like for the liquor, compost, refuge, water, wastewater, and stormwater. And I guess to get to Gary's point, well, how are those funds doing otherwise? And I'm here to say that we are healthy in all of our enterprise funds. You can see where we're at with in regards to the liquor fund. Now you see we've got a budgeted loss of about $13,000. We have to remember $550,000 we're transferring into the city's general fund. And then we have a cash balance of over $400,000 in that fund. The compost is sitting healthy. Right now we're at about $2.7 million. That's your creek side. Refuge, your garbage fund, about 1.8 million. Our water, wastewater, and stormwater funds are all healthy as well. And those are all paid for by the rates that we charge our users. Liquor Hutch and Creekside continue to do well, and they'll contribute $670,000 to our general fund in 2023. We have no increase in our garbage rates that are in the budget for next year, and those rates haven't been touched since 2008. We are shifting the way we charge our water and sewer rates in 2023. Some may see an increase. Overall, likely be a push. Basically meaning that you might be paying a higher base rate, but a lower per gallon rate. And a lot of it might come down to users. We know like our apartments are gonna probably see the biggest impact because I think we felt that they weren't paying quote unquote their fair share of the rates. And so some of what's being proposed for rate adjustments will impact that. Otherwise, all of our enterprise funds continue to have a healthy fund balance. There will be a slight increase in our stormwater rates for next year. One thing to keep in mind that I didn't touch on, the sales tax that we collect is divided between our water and wastewater funds. That was passed in 2011 or 2010, whatever it was, to help pay for the debt that was associated with both the water and wastewater plant. That debt is set to fall off in 2026. And then we talked about just the transfers from the enterprise funds and Hutch Utilities, and the money that we get from Hutch Utilities. You know, capital needs due to the age of all the facilities are starting to increase, so we are starting to put more and more money into those buildings, but our cash balances are at a level to where we're not seeing a significant need to adjust rates in any of those funds. So that's a kind of a brief rundown of our enterprise funds. Next, I want to take a look at our proposed capital improvement plan and our debt management plan. Basically, our capital improvement plan is our big project plan. That's your street repairs, your building repairs, your heavy equipment or vehicle replacement. We budget for that out of a separate fund that's not our general fund. But over the next 5 years, we've got about $52 million that we're looking to expend to make various different capital improvements throughout the organization. That's just a breakdown of the various different years. On average, it's about $10 million a year. you'll see a pretty large increase in 2024, and that's for the HATS facility. And we're currently working to get bonding dollars to help pay for that because of the joint venture with the state and the county. So we look at, okay, Matt, where does funding come for that $52 million over the next 5 years? Or and where does it go first, and then where does the funding come from? So when we talk about how only 15% of our general funds go into play for streets and highways, well, you've got between the public works, infrastructure, and enterprise, you're looking at about 90% of our capital dollars. So over the next 5 years, we're going to be investing about $19 million in our infrastructure. That's new streets, partial reconstructions, our pavement management program. Another roughly 14 million is going to our enterprise fund. So that's improvements at Creekside, the water plant, the wastewater plant, our stormwater system. About 2 million, $1.5 million is going to public safety. Most of that's going to be equipment and vehicles. We got about 12 million for public works. That's anything from our airport to our cemetery to our buildings and vehicles. Our HATS facility is located in that. Another 4.5 million goes to park and rec. That's for either playground equipment, maintenance of the various of the 41 different parks that we have throughout the community, and maybe programming. And then we have about 1.2 million for general government. Most of that is technology related and upgrades of software and other needs. And I actually think we're looking at doing the parking lot out here at the city center. It's included in that as well. Oops. Where does it come from? Roughly 23% of that 52 million we'll borrow. That's debt that we're going to take out to pay for those improvements. Another 15 million, or roughly 29%, is enterprise funds. So when you pay your water bill, your sewer bill, your garbage bill, a portion of those rates are going to help pay for the various different improvements at our different buildings. And so we're not having to have taxes pay for that. User rates are paying for, maybe a sales tax is paying for those improvements at those different facilities. We do put some tax money into this plan. That's roughly 7.5 million. Special assessments, that's direct costs that will be assigned to property owners, count for about 4% of it. And then we do get state aid and grants. We're expecting about $13 million to come in over the next 5 years to help pay for some of these various different projects between state aid donations. And then we do have some special funds and cooperative agreements with township Hutch utilities that will help pay for some of these other projects. As we look at next year, about 4.5 million is going for infrastructure. We're looking at Dale Street, Roberts Road, Century Avenue, and doing some bridge deck repairs along with the Highway 15 trail. Some improvements to our enterprise funds in those facilities. Parking lot at the new fire department, and then vehicles for the most part amongst the other different facilities. One thing I always like to highlight during this process is that we do have a plan in place. We do have a debt management plan that takes into account our debt and where that money is getting spent and how often we may be looking to increase taxes to pay for that debt. We did previously have a $2.6 million debt plan. That was prior to when we built the new police station. And when we built the new police station, we added to our debt. And that's kind of a 16, 17 year look when you look at our graph here of what our debt plan is. So generally when old debt falls off, we're replacing it with new debt, which is helping to essentially maintain our infrastructure throughout the community, where we're not seeing large influxes in our tax levy. Prior to the last 2 years, our debt levy had increased in 6 years. And that was due to the planning that we had done in place. And you're going to see that's going to uptick now over the next several years. And that was a decision made by the council when we decided to borrow to help fund the police station. Obviously, one thing to point out, With our increase in interest rates, that's gonna have an impact on our buying power in the future. We've probably had a little bit of luxury over the last couple of years being able to do more projects because interest rates were so low. And that's obviously gonna change in the upcoming years. So kind of to try to wrap all this up. This is just kind of a graph that highlights where we were at in 2022 compared to what we're proposing in 2023, and even the changes from September to now. And so you can see on the kind of the far right side, this is when we talked about, we've lowered about $206,000 in taxes since our preliminary levy was adopted in September. What will be coming to the council in December is a 3.3% tax levy increase to the city's portion of the tax levy. When you take into account the EDA and HRA levy, you're looking at an overall total tax impact of about 3.1% increase. Once again, this is summary information. We're looking at about a 2.6% increase in our general fund revenue. That will be matched with a 2.6% increase in expenses. You can notice that once again, the tax levy increases, the city portion being 3.3%, with overall total impact of being 3.1% for next year. So the biggest factor behind the levy increase, and that's our general wage and benefit increases. As we talk about, we're a staff-driven organization. So general wage increases for next year will push up our projected expenses by about $229,000 for next year. And there is a little bit of inflationary factors, but to be completely honest, our biggest driver in the tax levy is the cost for our employees. Just some additional information outside of cutting back on services provided at the events center and splitting up our public works director and city engineer position. The budget includes no other significant increases or cuts in staffing or changes in service. Staffing costs and capital needs continue to be the biggest driver of our budget. Fund balances continue to remain healthy and high, and the fiscal condition of the city, fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. I think our general fund balance is roughly 58% of our projected expenditures for next year. The state's budget forecast, which was released today, has a $17.6 billion surplus. In February, that was at $9.2 billion. The good thing is we shouldn't be expecting any state aid cuts for next year. And really, the state's budget situation shouldn't have any negative impacts on the city. Home values continue to increase, and the city is continuing to see growth at all levels, including multifamily, commercial, and industrial growth within the community. Obviously, inflation and supply chain issues are impacting the city as well. We talked about the police station. We're 12 to 18 months out with getting AV equipment to finish that off. So it's obviously impacting the city as well. It's a lot of information that was just shared. So first off, thank you for sitting through that. Thank you for those from the public that were here tonight, those that are watching on TV. This is really the next portion of this hearing is to open up for any questions from the public or the council members, to see if I can do my best to answer any of that, or even just to give you guys feedback. That's the purpose of the public hearing.
Well, man, he sat through the whole time, so he's gotta have a question.
I really don't. I really just decided I wanted to be informed and understand the financial process. I did appreciate the comment about being, a people-run organization. I guess I'm just curious, like many businesses, has the city struggled with turnover and retention of employees this past year, like many other businesses face that challenge?
I would say, actually, we figured out our retention rate for the past year is about 10%.
Okay.
When you look at the market, it's 20, so
Yeah.
we've actually done very well.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is the wages and benefit package that we have. Certain areas struggle, public works, police. I would say in recent years, we haven't seen as much turnover in police And I think some of that, if I'm being honest, is just the atmosphere, and probably we're not dealing with some of that here in Hutchinson. But in the past, where we maybe get 20 to 30 applicants, we now get 5 to 10. I think that's probably been the biggest change that we've seen in our recruitment and retention. We're not losing a lot, but when we do, much interest.
During the COVID years, the seasonal staff was a challenge during the summer, but then we raised the pay rate and then it seemed to be better.
You know what, and that's a good example, because you go around town, Quick Trip's hiring at 15, 17 bucks an hour. We were hiring at 10, and we were struggling, and so I think we increased about $3, $3 to $4 an hour. And that helped us a lot this year, regards to recruitment.
Just for the record, maybe your name,
Oh, yes, Corey Gallagher.
and Corey, tell them where you're, or what business you are.
Yeah, I work in town. I've been with customer relation, outsourcing call center on the edge of town for over a decade. Currently, I oversee all of their commercial properties throughout the state of Minnesota and other locations outside of running the contact center. So yeah, and I live on 1443 South Fork Drive.
Thank you.
Corey just said, actually just, company to move in part of the building, so.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, the agri trading expansion, we increased their footprint from 2,000 square feet in their original facility, and now they're in 5,000 square feet in the building on 1150 Fifth Avenue Southeast, part of the customer relation building.
Nice.
And we're looking to extend more tenants there, so I might as well get that in.
Exactly.
I was wondering if you were gonna throw that.
Yeah,
one
we
in.
have 8 to 10,000 more square feet for expansion there.
Mayor, council, any questions, comments, thoughts? Like I said, you know, we won't be approving our final budgets and levies until our December 27th city council meeting. So if maybe there are some that are watching on TV or streaming this, they're more than welcome to obviously reach out to any of your council members or out to me personally. My phone number is 320-234-4241. Or you can email me at mjaunich@hutchinsonmn.gov. And I feel perfectly fine. I just sound like crap.
I think it was deteriorating.
Yeah. The more I talked, no worse.
Well, we probably should adjourn before he can't talk at all.
Thank you for the concise and all the information. A lot of work's put into it. Appreciate it. And, like you said, if people have questions, we're available.
I just think it's a good thing for the public to understand where all the money goes. I mean,
And where it
really
comes
is.
from.
Where it
Yes.
comes from, where it's going to.
Yeah.
So,
Anything else? Entertain a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
An interesting afternoon.
Motion by Pat,
I'll second.
second by Chad to adjourn.